food and drinks and activities on a tropical beach. Oh my, why should you choose an all inclusive for your next vacation? That's what we're going to chat about today.
When we last talked, we had mentioned that we were going on the Norwegian Aqua, which was their brand new ship. Unfortunately, our plans have changed. So you may have heard that there was a storm in the Atlantic, and it obviously affected more than just Norwegian. And these things do happen when you're on a cruise ship. So, next, in 2 weeks, we're going to have an episode that we're going to talk all about what happens when your travel plans change like this. Last minute changes, hotels, travel insurance, kind of what you'll experience because we have been on a ship where our itinerary changed and we were on it for a couple of extra days. So that will be in an upcoming episode. In the meantime, we unfortunately won't be able to cover the Aqua, at least for now, but it is coming. It is going to go to New York for a couple of days, and then it will move on to Florida to start its naming ceremony and then its scheduled routes.
All right, before we get into all inclusives, Jody, how was your trip to Omni Boston?
It was great. So I had a press trip, which included my stay and my activities at the Omni Boston. And there's two Omnis in Boston. This is the one at the Seaport, and it's the newer of the two. And the Seaport District in Boston, for anyone not familiar with Boston, is kind of a newer neighborhood. When I first moved here, it was a lot of parking lots and waterfront, but not a whole lot of development. And over the past, I'd say like 15 or so years, there's been office buildings, shops, activities, museums, and hotels, along with a huge convention center. And so the really cool thing about this hotel, unlike a lot of city hotels, is that it had like 7 restaurants, this amazing
Oh,
spa,
wow.
a rooftop pool, which is open year round, which is unheard of in
Wow.
Boston. It has a like unbelievable amount of art, and you can even go through a QR code and read about the different art. But the thing I just wanted to mention here, because it kind of tied into a previous episode we did, is that they have a full tower called the Artist Tower that is all specifically designed for solo travelers.
So cool.
So I didn't stay in that tower. I stayed in the regular one, but I did get to tour a room, and it's really cool because it's a small room. The sink is in the room. It kind of divides it, and there's a little couch. They have a lap desk, which I thought was a really creative way
Oh.
to have space. But they have floor to ceiling windows, and so what that does is really opens the space up and makes it look so much larger. And then because they don't want to take up any space with like clutter, they removed the coffee makers from these rooms and they put these like drink stations, kind of like you might see in like an airport lounge, that'll make like a
Hmm.
coffee or a latte, cappuccino, complimentary in the corridor. So, great option if you are a solo traveler visiting Boston. It's obviously less expensive, but you get all of the amenities.
I love that resorts and cruise ships and everything, they're kind of embracing solo travelers. So that's
Yeah.
awesome to know.
Yeah, and that way you save money. And, if you're in Boston in a city hotel, you're probably not going to spend a whole lot of time in the room anyway.
So, today for our main segment, we are going to talk about all inclusive resorts and why you might want to choose one. But I'm going to just go ahead and ask Jody to explain to us what exactly does that mean? What is an all inclusive resort and how is it different from other types of accommodations?
Yeah, so just as the name would imply, you pay one price to go to an all inclusive resort, and all or most of what you would do at the resort is included. So, food, drinks, activities. Now, this can vary. Some places don't include alcohol, some places charge extra for certain activities. Gratuities are always a question depending on the resort. But in general, once you're there, you pay very little.
Okay, so I grew up in the 70s and I remember the Club Med commercials from back in the
Mhm.
70s and they were in my head. I still have a very 70s experience going on there. But what is the experience like at an all inclusive?
Yeah, so obviously that's going to vary by resort. It's generally pretty casual and, stress free because you're not thinking, like, where am I going to eat or do I need to, take my car out to eat? Do I need to book a car? So it's pretty stress free. I think most of us, when we think of an all inclusive, do think of like a beach resort. And that
Hmm.
is true in a lot of cases, although there are some all inclusive experiences that are not specifically beach resorts. The thing about staying at an all inclusive is your food and drinks, you're basically paying for them when you pay, the rate. So you're not going to want to leave the resort very frequently. You're not going to want to leave for lunches and dinners. So in general, the resort is where you're going to spend all your time. And that's really how the experience differs.
And what are the biggest benefits? Like you mentioned that everything is kind of all included, but I'm bringing my family or it's just my husband and I. What are the biggest benefits of staying at an all-inclusive resort?
I think for a family, especially, but also for couples, it's really like the ease of planning. So you're not having to research all these restaurants in town, researching the safety of the area. You don't have to rent a car or get a car service or a taxi to go out and have your meals. And you don't have to worry about price. So everything's, and I think when you have older kids, like, self-sufficient kids, I don't necessarily mean like adults, but I think that their experience at an all-inclusive is fun because they can go up and get their, virgin strawberry daiquiris whenever they want or their ice
Hmm.
cream without really having to worry about, what it costs. But then also, and this is a big thing if you're budgeting for your vacation, it's very easy to budget for an all-inclusive. You know what things cost. And so you can kind of, when you book it, know exactly like this is what I'm paying, and I'm probably not going to pay a whole lot more.
Yeah. And that's why a lot of people choose like the Disney dining plan when they go on vacation because they know up
Right.
front, I've already spent this money. I know how much this trip is going to cost with very few exceptions. So it's definitely an advantage to people to have all of that factored in up front.
Right. Right. Right.
And we mentioned families. And again, I have the couple running on the beach Club Med 70s commercial. Is an all inclusive resort a good choice for families? Like, what makes them family friendly? Are there activities for kids? What are the benefits for families with little
Yeah.
kids?
So it's, back to the research. There are adult only all inclusives. There are all inclusives that are better for adults
Hmm.
and don't necessarily cater to families. One of my favorite all inclusive resorts and one of the best for families, if not the best, is Beaches in Turks and Caicos. And Beaches it's part of the Sandals brand, but it's specifically the family version of that. They offer,
Hmm.
I mean, the one in Turks and Caicos, besides being in like the most beautiful location, has like a water park, it has a beach, it has numerous pools, tons of activities, a kids club, and they have a partnership with Sesame Street. So you get like a Sesame
Oh, I
Street
love that.
character parade, some Sesame Street themed things in some of the meals. That is so much fun for kids. And it's all included. So you're not paying extra to go to the water park. You're not paying extra to go to the kids club. But obviously they're not all like that. So you definitely want to research.
Right, right. And this is a question, and it might be a little bit left field for you, but because we've been talking about solo travel, is this a good place for solo travelers? I have seen a lot of all inclusives that tend to skew very romantic. It's very couples focused. Would a single person going to an all inclusive be uncomfortable?
Necessarily think so. I mean, it doesn't cater to the solo traveler, right? In general.
Hmm.
But, and so, I mean, I guess it depends on the resort, but you're not typically going to see, like with a cruise, you might see things that are specific to solo travelers. But, you know, I don't think it would be, I guess it just depends on your comfort level, basically. You are going to see a lot of people in groups, and even sometimes maybe more so than normal because you might see multi-generational groups and families, so extended families. So, yeah, it just depends on your comfort level.
Yeah. And I think if I was a solo traveler, I would probably lean towards a family friendly resort where
Right,
maybe I wouldn't stick out as much if I was by myself.
right, right.
When you get to the all inclusives, and I'm a cruise person. I love my cruises. I love, my trivias and my I'm not going to sing karaoke, but I will watch other people embarrass themselves. What kind of activities do you find at an all inclusive resort?
So again, it's going to vary, but you might see shows, you might see performances, singing, dancing, that type of thing. You might see, like I mentioned, at beaches, they do like the parades and stuff like that. You might see like a local kind of, because a lot of them do try to bring in some of the like local culture and that sort of thing. You might see things like trivia, those types of activities, maybe karaoke. And you're also going to see things like pickleball and you know, kayaking and snorkeling, and of course if it's a beach resort. A lot of times these places won't include motorized sports, so it would just be non-motorized. And then you probably find like fitness centers, you might find fitness classes. I've been to an all-inclusive that had like yoga on the beach. So it just varies.
So, and is this something that anybody can participate in? Do you have to sign up like months ahead of time? Can you show up and do these things?
Yeah, I mean, the ones I've been to, you can show up most of the time for the fitness activities. A lot of them will do even like water Zumba or something like that, where, if you're already in the pool.
That's cute.
But I would say there are going to be cases, things like pickleball or, things that are capacity restricted. There might be a sign up in
Right.
advance, probably like once you're on property, and not necessarily something that you would need to do like months and months in advance.
That's awesome for people that hate some of the restrictions of like being online or on the phone at 7 o'clock, 60 days in advance or 45
Yeah.
days in advance to make sure you've got, everything lined up the way you want it.
Yeah. I mean, I generally
What are
recommend
the
that
things
you,
that might, I'm sorry.
I was, I would generally recommend that what you do is just research what the resort has to offer, because, if you're doing something like tennis or pickleball and you want to bring specific clothes for that, you do want to be prepared and just see, when reservations need to be made. But yeah, in general, a lot of it's pretty flexible.
And they have all that equipment there, right? You're not lugging your tennis rackets and stuff.
Right. Yeah, you can use what's there.
Perfect. What are the things that are going to cost extra? We've budgeted now. We know that our food, our drinks, all of that's going to be taken care of. What isn't taken care of?
So, obviously, again, I keep saying it depends by resort. I've stayed at a place where alcohol was not included. They included activities and food, but the alcohol wasn't included. A lot, most all inclusives do include
I'm
alcohol,
just going
but
to tell you, I had no idea that was a thing. I thought all inclusive just automatically meant booze.
no, this was like a lake resort in Maine, so it wasn't necessarily like the traditional like oceanfront resort. And then sometimes you'll see things like an upcharge for certain food, like you might see on a cruise, or an
Yeah.
upcharge for certain alcohol. Like if you wanted a premium wine or a champagne or something like that, you would pay extra. And then, sometimes there'll be like a charge if you want a cabana or something like that, where it's not included. Gratuities is the big one, because I've been at an all-inclusive resort. So beaches, gratuities are included, and they don't accept gratuities beyond, what you've paid. I've stayed at some where we pay the gratuities in cash. And so if that's the case, you're going to want to have a lot of like singles and fives and like just lower denomination money, because it can be hard to get that change when you're on property. The last one I stayed at actually didn't accept cash for anything. So
Wow.
they gave you like a receipt for your meal, like zeroed out, and you just put the tip on that receipt and it got billed to your room. So
That's
it'll
good to
vary.
know in advance because I know a lot of people go on these vacations with pockets full of cash so that they know they're not charging anything and they can pretty much stick to that budget.
Right, right, right.
So we're at this all inclusive. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. What am I missing? What are the downsides to staying at an all inclusive?
I think for people who don't love all inclusives, it's because they really don't want to spend that much time at the resort. They might want to do things outside of the resort. They might want what they would consider like a more authentic restaurant, like small family owned restaurants, not big resort restaurants. If that's the case, if you really do want to have these dining experiences like outside the resort, an all inclusive might not be your best option, because like you're paying for something you're not using. And if you do think like I'm going to take day trips every day and go to all these different things, again, you're not taking advantage of what you're paying for. So that's the biggest downfall, I would say, is just, you are kind of, your best option is to spend all the time at the resort, and that isn't always the vacation experience that you'll want.
Right, right. I'm planning a wedding for a family at an all inclusive resort. And one of the things that they asked me to research were specifically the restaurants, because they have stayed at all inclusives where there were just two restaurants and they
Right.
want one where they don't have to choose between the buffet and the Mexican restaurant. Like they
Right.
want other food. So, and there are all inclusives that have multiple
Yeah.
themes or multiple cuisines.
Yeah. Again, it's a
So do you,
really a research thing.
yeah, and there's so many of them. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
there are just so many of them. It's crazy. Do you think that you actually save money doing an all inclusive than doing one of these, oh no, I don't want to stay in the resort because I'm going to be outside and I'm going to eat at all the restaurants and do all of the things. Is it less expensive to go to an all inclusive?
So it depends, I think, a lot on what you spend your money on. So if we're talking
Hmm.
somebody who is going to go, so you remember you're paying one price for an all-inclusive. Typically there's a lower price for kids or, children. So you'd have to look at that. But, you're paying for the alcohol. You're paying for the food. If you're someone who doesn't drink, then you may not save money. If you're someone who
Right.
doesn't eat a whole lot of, eats really tiny meals, maybe you aren't saving money. But in general, I think for the average person who will drink some alcohol, who eats 3 meals a day, it can definitely be a cost savings. And it's just like controlled cost, like what you're spending.
Right. I'm also just going to throw this out there because, I have clients that would never have thought of going to the Dominican Republic unless they could go to an all inclusive because they just feel like no matter what the government travel warnings are, there's just some kind of insulation and safety feeling around an all
Right.
inclusive resort.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it makes sense that you're seeing these, you don't see all-inclusive resorts in Paris, right? Because people want to go out and explore. Like you see
Yeah.
them in places where there's a beach, there's amenities, there's things you want to take advantage of, usually good weather, right? Or a location that you want to be on vacation in so that you're not looking to explore, you're looking to kind of take advantage of nice weather, a beautiful spot. And yeah, maybe you don't want to go outside the resort. Maybe you feel safer within. You don't want to do that research to figure out where to go for various reasons, safety or just no interest. And yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's a very viable reason.
And not only just from a, pickpocket kind of an angle, I would feel much better having everything right there so that I don't have to risk getting lost. I'm going to wander off on my own and I may
Right.
never get
Right.
back. I just have that kind of sense of direction.
Yeah, or you don't maybe want to drive in a foreign area. You don't want to be worrying
Yeah.
about directions and where you're going and where you're going to park when you get there and all of that.
Yeah. All right. We are going to throw it back to you, our listener, because we want to hear your opinion. Would you consider an all inclusive resort as a family vacation, or do you think it's only for couples? Have you been to an all inclusive resort that you absolutely love and you would recommend? We want you to come and chat with us. So drop a message in the comments and let us know how you feel about all inclusives.
We have a question from our solo travel episode that we did a few weeks ago. Anna, do you recommend joining any sort of travel groups like on Facebook or other social media if you're looking to do solo travel?
I absolutely recommend that you join the groups, but I also highly recommend that you have to be careful. You do not know these people on Facebook or on other social media venues, and you want to make sure before you commit to, I don't know, doing a tour with someone or meeting someone by yourself in a foreign country or something like that. You just want to make sure that you take some safety precautions. This is a great way to meet up with other travelers, especially other solo travelers. It can be super fun to meet people and get to know them before you actually go on your trip, but you need to be careful that they're legitimate people, they're real people, they don't mean you any harm. Check their profiles on Facebook, make sure they didn't join 10 minutes ago. Maybe make sure that this is not the only group that they're in, that maybe they have some similar interests to you. Above everything, you have to make sure that you are feeling safe.
Yeah. And don't give your money for deposits or anything like that until you've done your research and give it in a way that you can, you know,
For
file some sort
sure.
of claim.
Absolutely, for sure. There are a couple of news stories that I think, Jody, you have a ton of information on. And the first one, we don't really have JetBlue here in Philly very much. So tell me about JetBlue's new Even More.
So JetBlue recently, they always had Even More Space, which was their seats that had kind of like a premium economy. So they were the exit row seats, and then there was some of the seats in the front of the cabin that had more leg room. And they recently rebranded so that now the Even More seats are just those seats in the front, not the exit rows. And they call it Even More instead of
Mm-hmm.
Even More Space. And it's meant to be a more premium experience. And I did get to fly on Even More on one of my flights down to Florida. It was Interesting because the main difference is that you get a premium snack,
Oh,
which is
nice.
the Tate's cookies, and you do get to get called earlier to sit. But now that takes those exit row seats, and those are not even more. So those seats, generally, you might pay a premium to reserve, depending on like your status, but they aren't included in that category. So, is it worth it? It all depends on leg room, and if you want to be in the front, it's a great option. But it isn't quite the level of like a mint or first class or anything like that.
We don't have that many JetBlue flights that are accessible for us in Philly, but we do have Frontier, which has the Frontier Upfront Plus option. And I love that because you're usually so cramped on an airplane seat, but with this, they leave the middle seat open. So you have all the elbow room, you have room to put your stuff underneath the extra seat. So I'm
Nice.
glad that some of these budget airlines are giving you something extra. Let's talk for a minute about the beaches investment, like a gazillion dollars to do new resorts. To tell me what they're doing.
Beaches just announced a $1 billion expansion investment. So some of this stuff had been announced. Two of the big things is a new resort in the Bahamas, in Exuma, which
Hmm.
I believe is going to be a transformation of the Sandals Emerald Bay in the Bahamas. So they're turning it from Sandals, which is their couples
Hmm.
only, no kids offering, to a beaches. And then they are
Nice.
also opening a new resort in Barbados. So that'll be among like the sandals that are in Barbados.
Yeah.
And then a big one, and this was something I think I was last in Beaches, Turks and Caicos in 2023. It was already being developed, but it's a new village. So Beaches has these villages. They have Key West, Italian Village, French Village, Caribbean Village, and now this new one is kind of where, if anyone's familiar with it, where the Jerk Shack was, but it'll be a whole new village that is going to be opening up in 2026. So,
That's super cool.
yeah, and I mean, Beaches, we mentioned it before, but Beaches is a great family friendly option for all inclusives. It is, it's expensive, definitely, but
Hmm.
it is so popular with families. Every time we go, we see numerous people we know also on vacation there because it's just it's just one of the best. So it's nice that they're adding. They do have two resorts in Jamaica currently. And they, as part of this investment, are also creating another one, and that one is going to be between Ocho Rios and Montego Bay. So that one's called Beaches Runaway Bay. So yeah, the three new resorts, just great options for families that maybe have been to Turks and Caicos and want to do something different, or just want to try something different. Thank you so much for joining us in this episode of Wander and Chat. Be sure to, if you haven't already, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube if you want to see our videos. And join us next time. We're going to talk all about room locations. And this is such a fun and important topic because sometimes you don't even think this is important until you get to the room. So we will be talking all about that next week. Be sure to join us.